All right, welcome back. We're talking about Kimi K3. So about 2 weeks ago, we made a video about how this new Chinese open weight model has been released and how you can run it on your own local hardware if you had $2-3 million. Well, it's back in the news and not necessarily for the best reasons. During a security test last week, it broke out of its sandbox. So obviously all the major news outlets covered it. Bloomberg, TechCrunch, Wired even, Reuters, all of them covered it. It makes it sound like Skynet, like it gained sentience and escaped its sandbox. I read the actual security firm's report, and what really happened is funny. um, it's all clickbait. Turns out that it escaped the sandbox to cheat on the exam. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of break that down to you. Maybe it's not as impressive as you think it might. So yeah, let's take a look at the articles here. It's posted by TechCrunch. This was one of the first few articles that kind of published this finding, August 7th. A little bit late to the party here. However, you gotta kind of have to step aside sometimes from these AI news because it's just nonstop every day. And it's always something bad, right? Like it's always hyped and overhyped. So to really figure out what actually happened, you have to dive into these articles. The title is called "A Chinese Model Kimi Escaped Its Cybersecurity Testing Environment, Research Say." Who are the researchers? Well, the researchers are Frontier Security, and we'll read directly from the article here shortly. This article itself goes into detail about how Kimi was in a test sandbox designed to contain an experiment that was not properly configured. Obviously, the sandbox disallowed the AI model from accessing web traffic. It instead bypassed the sandbox, relying on CLI tools or command line tools, and then essentially was able to get access to GitHub. Doesn't say that here directly, however, we are going to see more details on the Frontier Security blog post next. So, for those that don't know, Kimi K3 is one of the latest, and some would say greatest, open weight model. Open weight model just means you can technically download it locally and kind of play with it, decompose it, figure out how it works. It's a really powerful model because it was trained on a massive parameter pool. I believe it was like 2.4 or it was 2.8 trillion parameters. So it's a massive parameters. Obviously it does not compete with the Opus 5s or the ChatGPT 5.6 souls. While those are not disclosed, those are projected or estimated to be in the 5 to 7 to 9 trillion, depending on who you ask. All estimations, since that information is not kind of readily available. So obviously not competing directly with that, but obviously still very capable, still benchmarking really high, and also now kind of competing with them in terms of escaping sandboxes as well. So if we take a look at how it actually happened, we see that the sandbox was supposed to be contained and it got access via a tool call, used bash shell to get access to GitHub. So how did it actually happen? Well, it was able to look at port 443 or global DNS 0.53 and found an allowlist for a couple websites, well, 3 to be specific, Python one, Debian, and a GitHub one. Obviously, this is all it needed. It then saw where it was in terms of its environment through some basic commands. And then after that, it was able to find a shortcut to GitHub, eventually getting access to CLI tools, which are, installed on most repos, and then essentially able to clone the actual benchmarking test that it was taking in order to get the solution. So their key takeaways, Frontier Security is saying that models are optimized for objective functions. What that means, it's getting the correct answer or the flag, not the human intent behind the benchmark, which is pretty obviously, we don't want them to cheat. We want them to get the best possible score. And obviously if their network path exists, it will find it if it's sufficiently capable, which again, when you're dealing with a 2.8 trillion parameter model with mixture of agents and a huge context windows, if there is something to find, most likely it will find it. So obviously this is what occurred. What's the impact? Well, the impact is that there is now inaccurate capability baselines, which means that high pass rate reflects environmental flaws rather than genuine reasoning or cybersecurity capabilities. So there's like a stain on this benchmarking capabilities inside of these tests. There's obviously cross-model contamination, which essentially states that models such as Kimi K3 or even OpenAI or Claude ones are going to find a shortcut. It's assumed that other models will also find a shortcut. So this is kind of setting expectations for the future regarding containment for these benchmarks. They have some key takeaways here. Obviously, treating evaluation infrastructure as part of the benchmark. All that means is don't just trust the actual software or sandbox containment. Treat the whole infrastructure as the benchmark itself. Deny network access by default, which is kind of a given for most of these sandboxes. Audit traces, not just final answers. So obviously, if there is abnormally high scores, you want to do an entire audit, not just the final score. Kind of repeated here as well. And then assume capable agents will expose paths, which is obviously what has been occurring in recent news. So obviously they also mentioned this up here, that this is correlated to the OpenAI and Hugging Face incident. There's also the Anthropic and them doing their own kind of retro and then raising their hand and saying, yep, we actually did a retrospective on, I think, like 140,000 different benchmarking tests. And we also found that our agents also escaped them. Kind of weird that they kind of put that out there, but I guess they didn't want to be left out of the party. And now Frontier Security is saying, yeah, Kimi K3 has also escaped the benchmark. So I guess kudos to them for pushing this out publicly. It is some hype news and it does bring some attention to the company. However, I don't know if this is good or bad publicity in their part, because there is some controversy. There are some finger pointing involved here, because Frontier Security is saying that some of these benchmarking software should assume the default configuration is locked down. And to be fair, the UK AI Safety Institute, for sure, I'm going to call it AISI, because it's pretty, it's pretty mouthful, says that this is an open source toolkit for AI evaluation, and the technical cause of the escape points to essentially a design philosophy gap, how AI safety evaluation handles network isolation. By default, inspect execute models tool calls in the main process with no sandbox at all. A Docker-based sandbox is available, and when used, its auto-generated configuration restricts internet access, which is saying like, hey, when you use it correctly, it does prevent internet access. But the framework does not mandate a single network posture. A design AISI describes as intentional, since its own cybersecurity testing deliberately permits internet access to measure maximum model capability. So they're saying like, hey, this is a U fault, and they're saying no, this is a benchmark that by default should have security in mind. There's obviously some principles here. Never give local models shell access. Safe, the sandbox is your safety layer. Treat it like production security. Deny by default. Like, there's obviously some really basic things that we can do to protect these sandboxes. All right, so final verdict: machines are not rising. These test environments are shipping with leaky allowlist. Whether you blame the open source AISI or you point the finger at Frontier Security, doesn't really matter. We know that it's not a AI going rogue. It's more of humans being humans and making mistakes. We cannot blame the AI model for finding the best solution to a objective, regardless if it is a very lazy solution and it was able to kind of copy the answers. It's almost like human nature, right? If you give someone $100,000 to take a really hard test and you happen to drop the answer key in front of them, you cannot blame them for picking up that answer key, reading it before they take the test. Even worse, in this scenario, while you have the test, you dropped it next to them and then they were able to just grab the answer key and continue taking the test. This is kind of a weird analogy, but I'm gonna run with it. So nothing to be scared about. I think this is just going to continue happening as these models become more and more capable. And I think we have to put more ownership and more, I don't know, more consequences to these researching companies as well as these sandbox providers. Um, Being open source and a configuration issue, I think we're okay with that. All right, but that pretty much sums up the news for this. So yeah, I'll link all the videos, the old OpenAI ones, the Anthropic ones, as well as the Kimi K3 previous video, in case you're interested. This is day 22 of creating something in public every day for the next 30 days. That's it for today. I'll see you all tomorrow.